Well, good morning. Today is Wednesday, March the 7th. The title of today's devotional is You Think You Own It? Think Again. And we're taking our scripture reading from Leviticus 25. Now, Leviticus 25 is the close of the Lord giving Moses his law and commandments on Mount Sinai. It's a fascinating study in God requiring Israel to obey his law, have faith in his promises, and then the Lord's promise to bless Israel conditioned upon their obedience. Now, we find in this study here a number of things that will be a new introduction to us. For instance, in the opening verses, verses 1 through 7, you're going to see discussed there the Sabbath year. Now, we've studied the Sabbath, and knowing that the Sabbath was a day of rest and worship, and it was a day that followed 6 days of labor. Well, Leviticus 25 introduces us to what is called the Sabbath year. It was a year of rest. Now, realize Israel was an agricultural society eventually as they arrived in the Promised Land. And so the farmers were given this law, this guideline, that they were to labor 6 years. On the 7th year, they would allow the land to rest. That is, not to be farmed, no seeds to be sowed. Anything that would grow during that year was a volunteer plant. Now, if you haven't grown up on a farm, you don't know what that is, but a volunteer plant is the fact that there are seeds left over from the year's harvest before, and suddenly in the spring they begin to sprout, and as the Bible describes, they groweth of their own accord. Well, the farmer was forbidden to harvest the fruit in the Sabbath year. However, the volunteer growth and the fruits and the vegetables that would grow was there and could be harvested not by the farmer who owned the land, but by the poor, the servants, the laborers, and strangers, non-Israelites, were allowed to harvest that which grew, and the description is again in verse 5, of its own accord. And so there's the Sabbath year. It occurred every 7 years. And then we find introduced in verses 8 through 17 what is described as the Jubilee year. Now, what was the Jubilee year? The Jubilee year occurred every 50 years. Now, you would have 7 sevens of Sabbaths years. 7 sevens of Sabbath years. 7 years, each 7th year, a Sabbath, times 7 of those Sabbath years, and you would have 49. The 50th year, known as the year of Jubilee, was a year that the fields would be allowed to rest 2 years. So on the 49th year, which would have been a Sabbath year, no seeds were planted. On the 50th year, no seeds were planted. There was no harvest at all that was done. Anything that would grow during that period would have been a volunteer. And so, as we look at that, we understand God providing for his people an opportunity to reflect on his goodness and his provision. Now, the year of Jubilee would begin on the Day of Atonement, and its beginning was marked by the sound of the trumpet. Now, the year of Jubilee was a year of hope and a year of freedom. It was in the year of Jubilee, the 50th year, that a man was redeemed and forgiven any debts that he owed, and also the monies that maybe had come from the sale of his property. Well, that property was returned to him. And so every Jubilee year, every 50th year, a man's possessions were restored to his family. Now, the Lord made sure that he ensured the justice and the fairness of that which would be the lenderer and the borrower. In fact, we read in verses 13 through 16 the word oppressed. God was very concerned not only about the debtor, but he was also concerned about the insurer, or the man who would give a financial loan on that property. Understanding on the 50th year, all the debts were wiped out. God made a plan that the balance of years would be taken into account when a man purchased another man's property. Understanding the fewer years, the less value there would be to the man buying the property. And so God, in a wonderful way, ensured fairness. We read in Leviticus 25, verse 17, "You shall not therefore oppress one another, the loaner or the borrower, but thou shalt fear thy God. I am the Lord your God." And so the Jubilee year was a year of hope. It was a year of forgiveness. It was a year of redemption. Now, the failure to sow seed on the Sabbath year, and then especially on the Jubilee year, 2 years in a row where nothing would be sown, what was man to do? What was the Lord's answer for that dilemma? Well, he promised Israel that the Sabbath year and the Jubilee year would be abundantly blessed if God's people would keep his statutes, his judgments. They would dwell in the land safety, and the land would yield its fruit. They would be filled. And so it's a wonderful promise. God, in a sense, really said, trust me, and I will provide for you. Well, Leviticus 25, verse 23 through 34, there are laws concerning the real estate, and deals with poverty or illness. When a man was forced to sell his lands, well, he could recover those lands in one of 3 ways. A brother or a next of kin could buy the land back from the man to whom he had sold it. A second way was the land could be redeemed by the owner who had the financial means to finally buy back his land. And then the third way would be the original owner would be restored his land in the year of Jubilee. Now, there was a provision for selling a house and stipulations if the house was located in a walled city or a village where the lands were considered part of the house. The Levites, because they were the priestly tribe, had special protections for the loss of their lands. Now, there were laws against usury, that is, charging excessive interest. Now, it would appear in the scriptures that God's people were prohibited to charge their brethren interest for any monies that were loaned. Now, some people would argue and say, well, that was high interest. Be that as it might, God wanted to make sure that his people were not in any way oppressed or taken advantage of. There were laws concerning servitude. You know, sometimes a man would fall into such hard financial times that he was unable to pay his debt, and as a result of that, he would become a bond slave to another Israelite. Now, that Israelite was commanded not to treat that brother as a slave, but to treat him as a brother. But again, Israelites were not left without hope, because on the year of Jubilee, all debtors, all Israelite slaves were to be set free. Now, should a non-Israelite stranger live in the land and buy an Israelite slave because of his indebtedness, that non-stranger must release the Israelite from his debts, okay? Furthermore, an Israelite could be redeemed from slavery at any time. The year of Jubilee would determine the value of a man's slavery, his indebtedness to the purchaser or the loaner of the finances. Now, I want to close by just observing a couple of things. The Sabbath and Jubilee years are foreign to our culture. However, there are principles found in Leviticus 25 that you and I should not ignore. The Sabbath year was a Sabbath unto the Lord. What was it? It was an acknowledgement that the Lord blesses and prospers his people. That's the same thing that the tithe is. We give the tithe to the Lord. Why? Because we know that it is a result of God prospering and blessing us with health and strength and ability, that we have the means to not only support our family, but to give the tithe to the Lord. Now, the Sabbath year served then is an opportunity to reflect on the Lord's goodness and his provision for his people. But we're reminded, and I want to close with this thought, we're reminded that you and I are sojourners in this world. We are temporal owners of all that we possess. And so the Lord instructed his people, Leviticus 25 and verse 23, the land shall not be sold forever. Now listen, for the land is mine. Don't forget this. Everything that you own, including your own life and your own time, your talents, your abilities, all the things that you accrue and possess in your lifetime, eventually you're going to be reminded upon your debt that God owns everything. You and I are sojourners. And we would be wise to keep our affections focused on the eternal and not on the eternal. Close with this verse, Matthew 6:20 and 21. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. My friend, I close with this question: where is your treasure? You think you own something? Think again. God owns everything. And let's trust him. God bless you. Bye-bye.